So let's talk a little bit then about what CSS stands for. This is another one of those acronyms that you hear thrown around a lot. Most of the time people say CSS, and a lot of times they don't always remember what the actual words are for it, but they know what it does. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Ignore the cascading part for now. We're just going to focus on the SS part, so the style sheets. And we're going to talk about what a style sheet is. And briefly, a style sheet is a sheet of styles. But that's a really lame way to tell you what a style sheet is, because that's using the name in the definition. But a style sheet works with the HTML to define how the page should look and the styles that should be applied to the elements on that page. When we talked last week about this guy named Tim Berners-Lee, who they say is the father of the internet, right? He created HTML as a way to share documents within CERN. And he was also of the opinion, and I don't necessarily know why, but it seemed to work out. There's probably a really technical reason to this, that your structure of your page should be separate from the style of your page. So he created HTML as well as other people started creating style to add to that page. And a good way, so kind of going through that real quick, a brief history of CSS. We talked about HTML last week. So we're at HTML5 now. And really, there's only been 3 major revamps of CSS in that whole history. Back in the day, though, there used to be, before CSS1, there used to be a lot of different kind of styling that could be applied to different web pages and HTML and things like that. And there was it was confusion, mass chaos, I guess you could say. What changed, as you can see, CSS1 coming out in about 1996. And if you remember from last week when we showed the pie graph of Internet Explorer, it had about 75% of the market. Internet Explorer adopted CSS and supported it in its browser, which made it kind of the predominant and most dominant styling, and then kind of killed all the other ones out. And so that's why today we have CSS and not any of the others. And you can see over 20 years, we've only had, 3 major versions of CSS. It doesn't change a whole lot, but there is a lot that is in there in CSS. So for example, like I said, CSS3 is the most current version of CSS. It added features that weren't previously in CSS2, like rounded corners, shadowing on elements, and then gradient backgrounds. Previous to CSS3, this was stuff that engineers would have to do in JavaScript. They would have to interact with the elements and add that ability into the elements on the web page with JavaScript. But now they can do that straight in CSS. I still find that a lot of times they do things like this in JavaScript, because what you have is they get really familiar with JavaScript and end up doing a lot of the stuff they could do in CSS with JavaScript, which is fine. A lot of the times, though, if you move stuff out of JavaScript into CSS, you can make the performance of your web page a little bit faster. It may be negligible, but if you're looking for that, millisecond more of performance or whatever it is, that's something that you could take a look at. So let's give an example of a web page without CSS. You can see here, you have lists, you have paragraphs, you have headers, but it's pretty ugly. It's kind of hard to follow because it's just structure. It's just HTML, and it gives you headers all the way down to paragraphs and things like that. So if we instead add CSS to our HTML, we get a better web page and a better experience for our users as well. And going to the next slide, real quick, let me click all the buttons. You can see where CSS has come in and added things to your web page. So you have positioning. So you can see in the top there, you have the freedom with the butterfly and the freedom. Now we've moved that a little bit more center, and we've added area around it. You can see the background as well. Instead of being just in the image piece right there, we've added that as kind of the whole background for the web page. You can see the button. We've added that as green. We've added the rounded corners, and then you can see the font differences as well. So CSS will change your fonts on your web page. So we've talked about styling a lot. We know that one of the major reasons or uses of CSS is to apply styling to your pages. And we just went through some of that. You can change fonts, header colors, background images. There's so many things that you can do with CSS on a web page. The other major piece of CSS is positioning. So one way to think about styling is right here. I'm showing the ribbon bar in like a word processor with the colors, right? So all of these things you can do in a word processing, like Word or Google Sheets. These are the types of things that you would be doing in CSS. Whereas here you may be highlighting stuff, centering, changing the color, changing the font size. In CSS, you're going to program that stuff in via the syntax of CSS.